Okay, hearing no public comment, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the meeting calendar of 2025. So the original time of this meeting butts up against a couple of other priorities, I believe, I know for myself and for some others. So Katie will be sending out a doodle poll or some such tool in the upcoming week so that we can identify, maybe we're just adjusting this time or we're picking a different Tuesday to meet. So if you have any major issues on something that you want to avoid, maybe you could reach out to Katie and we'll take that into consideration. Is there any other items under the meeting calendar, Katie, that you can think of?
No, and Katie is not present currently.
Oh, thank you, Scott. You guys are very small on our screen, so it's difficult to see who's actually sitting in the room. I appreciate that. Okay, well, we'll jump right into the substance of our meeting with reports. So the executive board has been tasked with submitting reports to the legislature. And at this time, Scott and Rachel from the operating group have some updates on the disconnected youth report, the statewide data intermediary report, and education and workforce pathways reports. I believe disconnected youth is up first.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And or like you said, Kelly, the BCG team here is here with us to provide some updates. I'm just going to give a little introduction. Are we going to switch slides? Yeah, we have a couple slides prepared, but our agenda for our update is to just remind everyone the impetus for this request and report, to remind everyone again about the research questions and agencies involved, what the expected outputs are for the disconnected youth effort, where I think stand today, and we have an executive summary of early insight. Then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So just to provide some context, in October 2023, the Boston Consulting Group and the Connecticut Opportunity Project published this initial report to provide visibility about at-risk and disconnected young people. And since the report's publication, there's been a lot of interest in the issue across the state. And as a result, the legislature mandated that the executive board of P20 WIN replicate the report on an annual basis, starting January 1st, 2025. So given that was not a lot of time, the initial report did take some time, the Connecticut Opportunity Project and Boston Consulting Group are partnering with our team to reproduce the analysis. And so on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that our expected deliverables include a report on the count and composition of disconnected and at-risk young people and the associated factors with being disconnected or at risk. And we're using the same methodology that the Boston Consulting Group used in their initial report. And we've also considered some additional factors. So there have been some additions to P20 WIN since the report was initially published, both additions of data from existing agency partners and new agencies that joined the table. So we'll be updating a public-facing data visualization dashboard that already exists, just to improve access to report insights. And the Boston Consulting Group has been really just instrumental in creating handover documentation, a playbook, and really helping us understand and unpack the methodology used to create this report. So just a reminder about the research questions that are going to be considered in this update on the next slide. The big questions really are listed on the left. The goals listed in statute are that we've refined our understanding of at-risk and disconnected youth in Connecticut, and we look at the channels, pathways, and other factors associated with education and employment journeys. And in addition, there were a few questions that Department of Social Services asked us to address as a condition of their participation. So there are a number of associated research questions. They're all listed here on the right-hand side. I don't need to really go through all of them, but the top line takeaway is that we've updated the count. We've looked at where demographic characteristics might differ among these populations. We've looked at some geographic considerations. And then there's also, we've looked at some education and employment outcomes as well. So there's a lot of really exciting insights that we've been able to generate. We actually spent the better part of today going over this with all of your data governing board members or data stewards who contributed to this effort. And we really can't thank agencies enough for all of their engagement and participation over a very tight timeline. We've achieved what was done in a much longer time frame in a pretty short period of time. So we're really proud of the effort. And on the next slide, I just want to, the way folks should really think about this analysis, the analysis is meant to really provide insight into this population of at-risk and disconnected youth. So we aren't necessarily proposing a deterministic view of young people, just a kind of a measure and understanding of their current state. This is not meant to pass any value judgment about outcomes that people are experiencing or necessarily to assess effectiveness of existing services, but really to look at, where are there connections between agencies and where are there sort of opportunities for us to engage in measuring the impact of existing services. So we are not necessarily going to make claims about level of need in this population or exhaustively impact all of the factors that may influence this connection. But this helps us point stakeholders to this vulnerable subpopulation and helps us really think about the channels, pathways, and factors associated with this connection. So with that, I want to turn it over to my Boston Consulting Group colleagues, Nikki Axman and Leon Wang, and they are going to walk us through the report structure that you can expect to see and high-level insights.
Thank you, Rachel. And yeah, really appreciate you all making time for this. I'm joined by Leon here in the room, and then Claudia and Lane on the line, all from the BCG group. And I want to start off just by thanking you all for the engagement from your teams over the past couple of months. I think there's really been such a significant amount of work that's gone into this, and it really wouldn't have been possible without just a really high level of engagement and support that we've got. So yeah, so really appreciate that from everyone. So I'll be talking a little bit about and what to expect when this report is published in January, as well as some of the early insights that, as Rachel mentioned, we've been discussing with the team for the better part of today. So this is the report, the 2024 report. We're focused. We'll have a couple of different sections. So of course, starting off just with what is the count and trends that we're seeing across disconnected youth, but then the majority, and I think really the richest part is focused on factors. So understanding what are some of the pathways, what are combinations of factors, where are there insights around how different agencies are intersecting with segments of this population, where are there opportunities for care coordination, and how has that evolved over time? What are some of the longer term impacts of some of these factors and of experiencing disconnection and at-risk status? And so I think this is a great example of where you see the impact of what P20 WIN data can do by taking cross-agency and longitudinal data to get us to insights that we wouldn't be able to get to if we were just looking at any agencies in isolation. The last piece to call out here is we're also looking at economic impact of reconnection. So in addition to the human pieces noted above, we're looking at individually what are the longer term wage impacts, including wage impacts of different factors described above. And then from a community perspective, what is the impact for the state in terms of GDP and jobs, and the fiscal impact of reconnecting this population. So that is what to expect. If we flip to the next page, beyond the actual report, as Rachel noted, we're also putting together this public-facing dashboard and then a very detailed handover playbook. So those are all documents that your agency data data stewards are engaging with over the next couple of weeks. So why don't we continue here with just a quick update on where we're at in the process before we get to some of the initial findings. And really, progress to date has been immense. There's several pieces that happened really from late July to early December. The first was just understanding what are the questions that we're going to be answering and what data do we need to answer those questions. That informed the creation of a DSA, which we spent some time refining with each of the agencies before we were able to share that, answer questions, get that signed. And then the last couple of weeks have really been focused on the last month has really been focused on transferring data over to enable this analysis. And so we ended up receiving all of the data in early December, and over the past few weeks have had a chance to dig in and begin the analyses. So we've been able to uncover a lot of insights, but I would say this is still we're still mid-flight, so we're still deep in the data, and there's still insights that are emerging. So everything that we share today is preliminary. We just had a chance to share it with the agency representatives. So this will continue to evolve and be refined before we finalize these materials. In terms of next steps and what to expect, what the ask of each agency is over the next couple of weeks, we'll be sharing a draft report and draft exhibits for offline review this Friday, incorporating some of the comments that we got today, and then agency representatives will have a chance to comment through January 6th, and then over the next couple of weeks, so through January 17th, we'll be aiming to finalize this report and share with the relevant legislative committees. I'm not sure if there's anything else folks from the OPM team wanted to add here in terms of kind of what to expect next.
Two things. One, again, just to echo the thanks to all the agencies who put a lot of time and effort into this, particularly today. 9 agencies contributed data, a lot of time and effort from Department of Labor, from our team here at Boston Consulting. So it's a lot of work. The other point here again, all of that I think has gone faster than the first time through with the more complex request, more complex analysis, and sort of no sort of additional resources for the state agencies. We're going to miss the legislative deadline, not by a lot, but we'll slip by a few weeks. So the fact that we're that close, I think, is a miracle. And again, we really appreciate the support from the Boston Consulting team to kind of help get through this and to give a playbook so that we can hand over and manage this. Sure.
If I might, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, but I just have to say it wasn't just a miracle. It was a lot of work. Members of my team, members of Scott's team rearranged their Thanksgiving plans to make this happen. And I just wanted to say that in front of the executive board. And we certainly are very pleased to have partnered with the Boston Consulting Group on this project.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, deep gratitude for everything that was invested in this. I know it was a really meaningful lift. So, unless there's any other questions here, I may just move us on to the most exciting part, which is what are we finding as part of this work. Again, these are initial insights. This is going to evolve before we finalize the report, but I think we already have a lot of useful takeaways from this work. So it's certainly showing dividends. So three categories that I'll talk about today. So the first is, what are we seeing in terms of count? So I think you all are probably all familiar with the 119K that was calculated, that was estimated as part of the last report. What we saw this year is a decrease in that number from 119 to 110. So a decrease of 9,000 young people. The majority of that decrease came from the disconnected count. So the disconnected count decreased by 7,000, 4,000 fewer severely disconnected, and 3,000 fewer moderately disconnected. we're seeing in terms of why is this happening, there's three factors that we attribute this to. The first is an increase in post-secondary enrollment rates. So as you recall, disconnection is defined by being disconnected from educational and employment institutions. So we're seeing that increase in post-secondary enrollment rates. We're seeing a very strong labor market in Connecticut, especially for entry level talent. And so that, is something you're seeing flow through, especially on the severely disconnected side. High school non-graduates, for example, that are able to find entry level jobs. And then we also saw a reduction in the total population of 14 to 26-year-olds. That is accounting for part of this decline in the top line total. So I think all that to say, most of the drivers appear to be kind of structural, more macro factors. But that said, this is the direction that we're hoping to see these numbers moving. So I think that's certainly something to celebrate. On the at-risk side, what we saw was a decrease by 2,000 in at-risk high school students. This is still relatively elevated compared to pre-pandemic levels. The decrease was driven by a decrease in chronic absenteeism. And so I think that is something that I know has been a priority for the SDE team. And so I think really worth acknowledging some of the programming and some of the efforts that have focused there. The other factors that make up at-risk students. So at-risk status is defined by chronic absenteeism, credit attainment in high school, or exhibiting behavioral issues. We did see slight increases in students that are behind on credit attainment and students exhibiting behavioral issues that were just balanced out by the decline in chronic absenteeism. So that is there are some trends there to really keep a close eye on over the next couple of years. So that's the top line number. I do think a lot of the richness of this work comes in this middle section and is more focused on what do we see as we look at longitudinal P20 win data, as we look at cross-agency analysis. And what we did here was we put together a set of factors and experiences among young people that we hypothesized may be associated with disconnection and being at risk. And broadly, those fall into 5 buckets. The first is around household and community economic needs. So this is things like interactions with the homelessness response system, receiving free and reduced lunch in high school, receiving Medicaid, SNAP, or TANF benefits, or attending a high needs high school. The second is around behavioral health. So that's receiving mental health and substance use treatment services from DCF or DEMIS, child welfare system involvement, criminal justice system involvement, and then lastly, education pathways. So that's special education, alternative education, and transiency. We found that all 5 of these factor categories are meaningfully associated with disconnection. So in some cases, you're seeing subpopulations that have a disconnection rate of upwards of 70%. So once you really drill down into where is this problem most acute, you see that it's really driven by these factors that I just listed. The factors that we found were most acute were enrollment in alternative education, receiving services from the homelessness response system, transiency, and interacting with DEMIS post age 18. And so that helps us understand kind of where is this population interacting with the state, where are there opportunities for intervention, and really target some of the potential interventions in a more precise sort of way. From a demographic perspective, we do see patterns that have emerged as well. So we see English language learners experiencing severely elevated disconnection rates. We see Black, Hispanic, and Native American youth experiencing high rates, as well as young men versus young women that are experiencing disproportionate rates of disconnection. The other thing I'll call out, and we went through this in a bit more detail this morning, but there are interactions. So experiencing more factors is more impactful. There's kind of a compounding effect that we see. So youth that experience 2, 3, or 4 even more factors are at particularly high risk of disconnection and at-risk status. And then we look at kind of specific interaction points between these factors that can help us really get to a more manageable number and say, this is the population that we're talking about. Here are some of the ways in which we can support this population. So one of the other pieces that we looked at as part of this were the geographic distribution of young people, of disconnected and at-risk young people across the state. And what we saw was that on a per capita basis, urban areas face higher disconnection and at-risk rates, but the majority of disconnected and at-risk youth do reside in suburban settings, and that's really driven by Connecticut's population distribution. So what that means is that it's certainly important to think about interventions that support this population in settings where the rate is highest, so in urban settings. But in order to really tackle this problem, and in order to scale up solutions, you really have to think about what's going to work in suburban areas where 60% plus of this population is residing. The other takeaway that we learned was really thinking about at-risk and disconnection on a spectrum, and at-risk is associated with disconnection in a really meaningful way. So what we see is that being at risk in high school is associated with a higher likelihood of disconnection after high school, being at risk for more years in high school. So let's say people that may have an attendance or behavioral flag for 2 or 3 years, as opposed to 1 year in high school, that leads to a higher likelihood of disconnection. And most of the individuals that leave high school before graduation are at risk. The earlier you leave high school, the more likely you are to be disconnected, and more than that, to be severely disconnected. So we're seeing the time in high school as a really important time that is associated with all of these longer term outcomes, both disconnection, but also wage, educational attainment. So even if at-risk students do end up graduating from high school, we still see these differences. We still see differences in post-secondary attainment. We still see differences in wages at age 23 or 24. And so I think what that tells us is that moment in high school is a critical intervention point in order to influence some of those longer term outcomes. The last thing I'll say here is we also looked at the economic impact of disconnection in addition to some of the human pieces that we talked about. And what we see, so both at an individual level, so what is the individual impact, but then also from a state perspective, so what is the economic case for the state for intervention? And so individuals do see a meaningful wage gap that emerges as early as age 23, 24. So we're looking at the earliest cohort, which is only age 23, 24. But even at that age, we're seeing meaningful differences in pathways and wages that are associated with these factors. And then in terms of community economic impact, the fiscal impact of disconnection is about 600 to 700 million per year, which is really comparing the scenario where the 57K disconnected youth are on track and employed, both from what is the additional revenue the state could capture from incremental taxes, but then also what are the expenditures in terms of incarceration and other components that the state would no longer need to cover for this population. So I think that helps kind of frame the upside of initiatives that support disconnected and at-risk populations. So I'll pause there. We're happy to take questions. We had a really good discussion this morning. We hope to continue this over the coming days and weeks. I'm not sure if there's anything else from our OPM colleagues or from the other BCG folks on the line. Otherwise, Rachel, maybe do you want to talk about what to expect next?
Yeah. So Jen has her hand up.
Hi, I was just wondering, I don't see post-secondary data in this, so I'm just curious, how you're talking about the impact of different pathways and progression, if we didn't have any post-secondary data in the study.
So we did have, but we had NST data on post-secondary outcomes that we used as part of this. So that was how we got at those outcomes.
Okay, I had asked her, okay. You have NSC data from SDE?
Yes, that's correct.
And was that included in the first report or just in the second?
I believe that there were certain cuts that were used in last year's report related to the NSC data as well. But I think we did, so in a lot of ways, we took it further than last year. So there's quite a bit of incremental analysis that we tried to layer on, and we tried to really utilize every agency's data to the fullest to get at some of the things that the team last year just didn't have a chance to dig into as much.
Thanks.
There's a lot to unpack. We went through a deck of probably 50 to 60 figures earlier today with your colleagues. There's even more to really reflect on, and you'll have the chance to do that as early as this Friday. So next steps are your colleagues who participated in our workshop today have been asked to share feedback with the team by close of business tomorrow. They've had the pre-read for several days already, and it was a pretty robust discussion today. The feedback by tomorrow is just so that we can incorporate that in the draft report, which the BCG team is going to deliver by this Friday. And then agencies are asked to share back comments, feedback on those materials by Monday, January 7th. And our goal is to really have all the feedback and sort of last minute sign-offs happening by January 17th. So I think Scott said this to the team earlier today, once folks have had a chance to reflect and ensure that the sort of the pre-publication standards are met, so we aren't exposing any PII, which would be almost impossible at this point, that suppression rules have been met, that all the de-identification and anonymization is there, that we do ask that folks sign off, each agency does sign off on the materials. And your colleagues were informed of that expectation earlier, and I think it was in an earlier part of our readout. And then the BCG team and our team are available if you want to set up one-on-one discussions, you want to talk about the report more in depth. We're happy to arrange those conversations as well.
And the one thing I'll just add on to that is, what we had today was we had about 4.5 hours. We spent a lot of time on the cross-agency insights. I think, we certainly want to be available to have more agency-specific conversations around what are the takeaways that may be most relevant for specific agencies as well, that we just didn't have time to get to. So we've extended that offer to the folks from earlier today. We also want to extend that offer to you all, and we may reach out if there's particularly kind of compelling insights that we wanted to highlight for folks.
That's the first update under updates that we have. Second update, Scott is going to provide.
Here, so this is it, as you may remember, under the legislation that required the annual updates, the disconnected youth report, there's a separate requirement to develop a plan on a statewide data intermediary for data on nonprofits that serve disconnected youth, which is also tasked to the P20 executive board with the same deadline of January 1st. So we are this close to signing a contract with a contractor to be able to undertake the planning efforts. We wanted someone with independence and some outside expertise on it. So we've got someone with good expertise in particularly in education, higher education, who will come on board very soon and hopefully take a couple of months to interview both and go through the planning process here. So we're interested in making sure that we can, once that contractor's on board, you'll get outreach from someone on the OPM side, and we'll queue up to have an interview with you about that. And I think that's looking again, the planning effort is really designed to look at where there's gaps in the data that we have on disconnected youth. And so I'll go back to Jen's comment as well. We know, I think the National Student Clearinghouse data is helpful and is a really good resource, particularly for out-of-state attendance. But we know that there's more that could be done with post-secondary data. We're very grateful to the private colleges for their interest in participating in this. And so in future iterations, I'd like to see if we can get more in-depth on post-secondary outcomes. That's when you go through the full sort of set of readouts from this, you'll see a lot there, but there's always more that could be done. So you'll hear about the data intermediary soon. Hopefully by the end of the calendar year, we'll start queuing up interviews for early next year.
And then our third update is about data request 42, the education and workforce pathways. So I just wanted to leave some early descriptive findings that we're here to share. A lot of this work, while much of the work's been underway for about the same amount of time, we're a small team, a lot of it's converged all in the moment. We've been very focused on the disconnected youth work. So we have made some progress on this analysis internally, but we're moving at a slower pace than expected. So I just wanted to remind folks about this data request, the indicators that are listed in the request and data sharing agreement. This project is meant to study 4 different indicators. So enrollment in programs across sort of our workforce and education systems, including Department of Labor, Office of Workforce Strategy, State Department of Education, and our 4-year, 2-year public-private higher education institutions, as well as the technical schools. We're looking at post-secondary outcomes, and we've listed a few ways that we're thinking about post-secondary outcomes, from program completion to employment status, wage gains, and attainment. The place where I'm going to show you a little bit of information today is around demographic data. So just understanding who are the people participating in the programs. I'm going to show you some of that for Department of Labor programs today. And then ultimately, and where we started to spend some time initially, is on the pathway. So the sort of where people go, what touch points do they have? And this is work that our team did in an applied data analytics seminar with not Connecticut data, but another state's data. So we have a lot of the code and infrastructure built. We just haven't yet put all of our data into that infrastructure to produce those dashboards. So these are the indicators, just to remind folks what to expect from the full readout. On the next slide, I just want to also remind folks about what the research questions are. So we're looking at some of the wage and employment outcomes for workforce training programs, as well as wage and employment outcomes for post-secondary adult education and technical education programs. We're interested in showing some of the common pathways, and then looking at some of the employment and wage outcomes by pathway, as well as which pathways led to the strongest wage growth. And, all of these research questions start with just understanding some of the basic sort of participation demographic data. So we have data on new enrollments. I'm going to show you some of the ways. Part of the benefit of providing the update is to get some feedback on how we display information. So these are sort of newer and sort of less finalized in terms of visualizations. But on the next slide, what I'm presenting are new enrollments for Department of Labor programs from 2016. Oh, I have 2023 in there as well. I listed 2022 in the title. And apprenticeship data actually goes back earlier than 2016, but I just kind of wanted to harmonize the years out. So I visualized these data and decided to show you some of the numbers in a tabular format, because the chart, as you can see with the trend lines listed in the far right column, they're kind of all over the place. So the start and end points for those spark lines for 2016 and 2023. And this just gives you a sense of some of the Department of Labor programs. And we don't have to, this will go in your follow-up material, so you'll receive this after the meeting today. But this overview is just to give you a good sense of like where new enrollments are for these programs specifically. And we intend to generate similar kinds of summary tables for all of the different agency data we've received. And then the goal is to then explore how the different participants have engaged in each agency's programs and where they started, what kind of pathway they've taken. So this is just a plain summary overview. On the next slide, what I visualized is just a breakdown of gender by program. And again, this is a high level overview, just looking at 2 categories. But it's important to see that, for instance, like the program serving veterans or serving more men than women. I have some early race breakdowns for the same programs. I don't have them visualized, but I can include those in the follow-up materials. And those are really helpful for understanding sort of who are our programs serving and what are some of the differences between them. So these are some high-level findings, and we're going to generate some similar kinds of visualizations for the other agencies as soon as we get through the publishing of the disconnected youth work. But we wanted to just provide some high-level updates and remind folks of where this work started and where it's headed. So I can pause for questions. Seeing no questions right now, that's okay. We're going to follow up with some other visualizations in the follow-up materials. And I think just reminding folks sort of the goals of some of these projects, so we can kind of get lost in sort of the doing and the data transfer and the management and the matching pieces. But ultimately, if there's things that those both indicators and research questions inspired for you, especially the participating agencies, if you have questions for us as we're working through that analysis, we're excited to entertain them. So thank you. Those are our big updates.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Rachel. It's more just a global kind of comment or comment around the desire to ensure that we're really laying the foundation about the importance of the early years as it relates to the workforce, right? As it relates to wages, making sure that we're connecting all of these pieces in these reports as much as we can, right? That we're not siloing disconnected youth from family and their experiences in the early years and may have led up to reasons why they are experiencing some of the factors relating to why they're currently disconnected youth. So that kind of more global approach, I just want to make sure that we're bringing that to the forefront and laying that out contextually when we think about these reports and this work. And understanding that not all the data is there, but could we also, think about what are some data points within the early years that could help, make the case or provide more context to some of these older years in the data.
Thanks for that. I think one benefit of updates and readouts too is that when we have a new, and we'll provide updates on data requests, especially before we sign agreements, if there's agency interest in participating in a data request that's on the table that wasn't originally tapped for inclusion, that's another opportunity for conversation, or maybe the readout sort of sparks curiosity for you as executives in your own agencies. And those are, if this partnership exists for your curiosity just as much as it does for external requesters. That's what we're so excited about with the disconnected youth work and with this pathways work, is that it's meant to actually help guide our own agency decision making and program design. So thanks for the comment. And we should talk about opportunities. Those are all of our reports. So we turn it back to our chairwoman. We can just go to update.
Kelly, did we lose you?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much for the update on those reports. Really interesting data that is coming out of them, and we look forward to the next iteration as you continue to work through all of that data. At this time, our next agenda item is updates, and Scott and Rachel will provide updates on our communications and consent management work. So I'll turn it back over to Rachel.
So we have two updates, and the first is around the communications and marketing work that this board approved. We are working with Cronin Associates, and two of my colleagues, Maria and Shelby, are on the line, and I'm going to turn it over to them for just a quick update on the work and their organization.
Great. Maria, did you want
Thanks,
to jump in? Oh,
It's
Sorry about
it's a pleasure meeting everyone virtually. Thank you for inviting us to this meeting. My name is Maria Suriello. I'm an AVP of Account Service here at Cronin. We are working, as Rachel said, alongside her and her team to develop communications and marketing for P20 Win. We've just started down the road, but we've made some really great progress in the past few weeks. Just by way of introduction of Cronin, Cronin is a full service integrated agency. It's been around 101 years. Okay, so we've been around for quite some time. We're located in Glastonbury, Connecticut. By full service, I mean we do everything from research through strategy, creative and development, production, marcom, media, analytics. So we do it all. We've worked with the state for over 30 years now. So we've touched a lot of different state agencies and governor's offices throughout those 30 years. I personally have been with the agency 9 years, working on state businesses that whole time. And we're excited to add OPM to the list of agencies and departments that we are currently working with. So thank you for that opportunity. Joining me is my colleague Shelby, and I'm going to turn it over to her to go a little bit deeper in what's happening right now with this project.
Thank you, Maria. Yep. I'm Shelby Tadman. I'm the head of strategy here at Cronin. So I lead all things market research, consumer insights, and creative strategy. So we are so happy to be working with OPM and the P20 Win team. And, we're working with them to refresh the branding and communications around this really important program, just with the goal of better communicating its value to key audiences and creating some of the tools to do that. So we've started with our stakeholder interviews to really dig into the current perceptions around P20 Win, where there might be opportunities for communication to move those forward. So the insights that we're getting through these interviews are really going to guide our work going forward. And we are just happy to be working with you all. I am actually newer to Cronin and newer to working with the state. This is my first in-depth program with the state. And so far it has been very, very interesting and really rewarding. You all are doing amazing work. So thank you for the opportunity.
So this work will lead to potential rebranding and other sort of creative updates for P20 Win. And while some stakeholder interviews are in progress, if you haven't already been contacted but are interested in contributing, please let me know. And I'm happy to put you in touch with the Cronin team. Our second update is about consent management. So Scott, that is yours.
I'm going to turn it over in a second to Philip, who I think is still online. Philip Ascendi's governor's office fellow, who's been working with us and previously was with DSS. And he's taken a deep dive into questions around managing consent for individuals so that we're making safe and ethical use of data. He's interviewed or reached out to probably most of your agencies, if not everyone. And we're very close to having sort of a final report. So Philip's going to give, I think, a quick overview of that, especially given the time where we are in the meeting today. But similarly, if there's follow-up or future conversation, please don't hesitate to reach out. So Philip, if you are set, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Ascendi. I'm an Officer of the Governor Fellow working with Scott and his team at DEPA. We've have the pleasure of working with Scott for a couple of months now, and one of my key projects has been to understand the landscape of consent practices among P20 win agencies. So the goal, we know consent is a big issue with regards to sharing data, and our intent was sort of understand how agencies are navigating it with and what OPM and the state can do to move the needle and removing those barriers to sharing data, specifically for research purposes. So for the last couple of months, I've been having conversations with various state agencies and organizations. I think Ajit is here, Ram is here. I've spoken to several agencies to understand how they deal with consent, particularly focusing on identifiable data and then sharing data for research purposes. And it's been quite an eye-opening experience learning about how agencies navigate consent and some of the work that they are doing, which are promising and in line with what we are seeing in other states. So far, aside the conversations with state agencies, I've also been looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, like California, Colorado, Michigan, and Virginia, how they are approaching the issue of consent with sharing data, not only for research purposes, but for care coordination and case coordination as a whole. The next slide has some summary of the findings that I have so far. The report is still in the draft stage, and some of the early findings that are what is right here. I think at a high level, the identified data has little or no federal protection, so most agencies do not require consent to share the identified data. However, when it comes to sharing identifiable data, the issue of consent, first of all, is out of scope for some agencies because federal or state regulations provide exemptions, or simply because the nature of the data they deal with is aggregated and therefore none of the data in there is identifiable. Some of the agencies that fall in this category are OHE, SDE, and the Judicial Service and DOL. We have the second bracket is agencies that have data which is identifiable and it does not have an exemption under any federal or state regulation. In this instance, there is a need to collect consent, but the agencies do not have the setup to collect consent directly. So the default is to require researchers to collect consent via their IRB processes before they come and request data from state agencies. And many agencies fall into this category, from DSS to DMAS and a couple of other agencies, where they have established policies that require researchers to collect consent or require IRB approval on consent before they come in to request data. On the other hand, there are a few agencies that are, I think, more forward-leaning. I think OWS and CCEH really they have consent forms that inform participants or clients about the fact that their data will be shared for research purposes. So those are a few agencies, organizations that are really sort of actively collecting consent directly from their clients or beneficiaries. Now, moving out of Connecticut, there are a couple of states that are working on common consent forms, that are working on modernizing the collection of consent, not specifically for research purposes, but for care coordination. And there's a lot of other initiatives in Washington State, in Virginia, in Michigan, and Colorado that is looking at the bigger picture of consent across care coordination and case coordination. And there are good, promising practices from there that Connecticut as a whole can learn from. In terms of next steps, I have a few agencies that I still have to speak to get more insight on how they are approaching consent. And then I'm still gathering feedback from agencies leads on the draft report to understand what is being missing, what needs to be corrected, and what could be more useful to them. So that is still in progress. And I think there are also initial conversations about modernizing collection of consent across state agencies, and then ideally to have a statewide consent registry. So I'm going to look at how does this initial report feed into those conversations and how does that move the needle in addressing consent issues in the state as a whole. So happy to have worked on this, and it's still in the draft phase, and I'm sort of collecting feedback from all those agencies to make sure this gets in a good place. Yeah, happy to answer any questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, moving forward, the board approved a modernization of the P20 Win system, and Scott has an update for us at this time.
And if you click, okay, so well, I'll talk here, and I'll try and keep this very brief. The analysis that you're hearing about earlier in the meeting for the disconnected youth and the education and workforce pathways, that's really the motivation to look at modernization. Exactly like Patrick said, this is something that's a real human drain on staff and time and resources to do things kind of the way done historically. And so we're looking at modernizing so there's an easier, more streamlined, more secure process. And so we've got the board passed the resolution in June to do that. That's sort of the rationale, the impetus for this. We are working on moving this forward in a couple of different areas. We're looking at a building an Azure environment with state IT in Connecticut. So we brought on a project manager who will start very soon to go through and work with state IT and all of your agencies, identifying, developing the requirements and building that out. Our hope is to have that done sometime in the first half of next year or so. We've also licensed a sort of off-the-shelf secure data enclave from Coleridge Initiative, which is called Administrative Data Research Facility. We've got a year license to use that for P20 Win analysis. And so we've had a couple examples we're looking at. We haven't actually put it to use, but we reviewed with agencies. And so that's another secure platform that should make analysis easier and safer for your agencies. And then many of you, I think, have been in touch with or will be in touch with Katie to set up 3 different subcommittees under, you can click to slide 22, I think. Done. 3 subcommittees comprised of staff of your agencies on one on security, one on privacy, and one on the legal agreements. So we've got, I believe, full, sufficient membership for all of those, and should be either have or will very soon schedule meetings for them. The legal one will come last, but if you click to the next slide, this is where also to make this a more streamlined process, we're looking at redoing the structure for the legal agreements, and the current thought is to pursue the direction that's here, where there's a set of 3 agreements rather than the 2 that we have now. I just want to sort of forecast this, that we'll be reaching out to make sure that we engage with your council and understand the different state, federal laws and regulations and how to make sure that we can capture those in the agreements. But part of this process is we have to have written agreements to ensure the safe, ethical, and secure use of data. And so we're looking at modernizing those agreements in parallel with the system itself. So that is either underway or pieces of it will kick off, again, in the next couple of weeks. That's it. Kelly, back to you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. On the data request, we're excited to be working with OPM and DOL on enhancing the opportunity to provide more clear data around the workforce. So we're looking forward to that. And we have a couple other current data requests in the works here. We have housing choice vouchers, Roberta Willis Scholarship Program outcomes, education and career workforce pathways, as I had just mentioned, dislocated youth, disconnected youth, Young Mothers Program, mental health access, crossover, youth privacy enhancing pilot program, and a review of chef outcomes. And at this time, if there is any other data requests or any other business that we need to bring to the board, now is the time. Grant updates, great. These grant updates, Scott, you want to take these?
Yeah, I think we can, these are sort of for informational purposes, so if folks want to dig into these, we can handle some of that offline, but we have, 4 grants that we're running through and managing, and we're hopeful that these are grants that can get sustained through the full term of the grant. These are the resources that support the staff that are working on P20 day to day. that I think is everything, yeah.
Great, that concludes our agenda items. I guess at this time I'll ask, is there any other business that is not on the agenda that needs to be addressed today?
I would just like, I'm sorry, Kelly, again to interrupt, but I just wanted to note that the grants are competitive grants. They are time limited. There is no permanent funding stream for P20 Win. And I just want to state that for the record. And that is something that we as a entire state need to think about going forward.
Thank you, Patrick. I think that is definitely an important item to state on the record. There's a lot of really important work that's happening here. We want to make sure that we can continue this great work. Great. And so may I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Kelly.
Thank you, Alice. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Gary. Okay. Well, this concludes our last meeting of P20 Win this year. Thank you all for a year's worth of hard work, and wish you all happy holidays and a wonderful new year. And we'll see you all in the new year.
You, Kelly. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.